Alright, so let's talk about numbering past 10. Some international comparisons. By the age of 3, children in China and the US have learned the names of the first 10 numbers and can reliably count up to about 10. By the age of 4, children in China can generally count up to 100. And children in the US are still struggling to learn to count up to 20. And so after 2 months of kindergarten, children in China can solve about 3 times as many basic arithmetic problems as children in the US. And so we might wonder, is there some ancient Chinese secret to mathematics, or perhaps some genetic predisposition to numeracy among Asian children? Most researchers don't think that is the case, and instead they focus on the words that are used to count in the different languages. So let's take a look at the comparison between what we used in English and what we use in Chinese. Now consider the first couple of number words in the two languages. So in English we have the words, of course, 1, 2, and 3, and in Chinese we use the word 1, 2, 3. And imagine trying to make sense of these. If you knew these first words, could you anticipate what the next word is going to be? And if you wanted to be really objective and not take into account the fact that you've been speaking English for a number of years, then you probably wouldn't be able to guess that the next 2 number words in English are going to be 4 and 5, any more than you could guess what the next 2 number words in Chinese are going to be. They happen to be si and wu. I'm really garbling my Chinese pronunciation here. But these number words, the rest of these number words have to be identified as their own words. We cannot predict what the number words are going to be in Chinese any more than we can reasonably predict what those number words are going to be in English. The important observation is there is no discernible pattern to the number words in English any more than there is a discernible pattern to the number words in Chinese. Well, what happens if we go beyond 10, beyond shi? Well, let's take a look at those number words. So in Chinese, the first number after 10 is called shi yi, and notice that that's 10 and 1. Unsurprisingly, the next number word after that is going to be xi-er, and there we have our word for 10, and then we have our word for 2, so we can translate this number as 10-2. What about the number after xi-er? Well, you can probably guess at this point it's going to be xi-san, and then our numbers are going to follow in their obvious order. I'm going to name them 10-4, 10-5, 10-6, 10-7, 10-8, and 10-9. So what about the number after 10-9, after shi jiao? Well, I know that the number after jiao is shi, so I might guess that the number after shi jiao is going to be, well, how about shi shi? Now, we could actually call the number this, but let's think about this. If we actually were to count the number of shi present, and let's go ahead and do that in Chinese just to be consistent, we might count yi, er. So there's actually er, shi present. There's 2 10s present. And so we would say that the number is going to actually be er, shi. And that's literally 2 10. Now try to do the same thing in English. So after 10 we have 11, and then after 11 we have 12, and given that these are the first 2 numbers after 10, the first thing that you should notice is there's no obvious connection between 11 and 10. There's no obvious connection between 12 and 10 or 11. There's no connection between these numbers, and given those first 2 numbers, it would almost be impossible to predict that the next number is going to be 13, because here we introduce a completely different naming system. And in fact, if we look at the numbers after 10, we get the teen numbers, and they follow no regular pattern. Well, wait a minute. Don't they follow a regular pattern? After all, at some point I get to the numbers 16, 17, 18, and isn't that a pattern we can follow? Well, it is, but it's not regular enough because it would only be a pattern if we could continue it. So the next number, 19, okay, that's good. But what comes after 9? Well, after 9 comes 10, and so do we call the next number 10-teen? After 10 we get 11. Do we call it 11-teen, 12-teen, and so on? A pattern and regularity only works if it is actually regular, and we don't actually count 19, 10-teen, 11-teen, 12-teen. So this apparent pattern that we have is problematic for a number of reasons. While it's easy enough to learn the Chinese names for the numbers 1 through 10, let's go ahead and just translate those into English so we can see what the actual structure of the Chinese number names are. So in Chinese, the number after Xijiao, 10-9, is going to be Shi, 2 tens, literally translated. After that, we'll count as we've been counting, Shi, again, literally 2 tens, 1, then Shi, 2 tens, 2, 2 tens, 3, and so on up until we get to the point Shi Jiao, 2 tens, and 9. And then the number that follows that, we might say that it's Shi, 2 tens, 10, but that's just 3 tens, and so we'll actually call that number Sanxi. And we can name the decade numbers after that, 2 tens, 3 tens, 4 tens, all the way up to 9 tens. Once again, it's worth considering what we do in English after that point. We get the number after 19 is not 10-teen, but 20, which represents an entirely new way of naming the next set of numbers. And we have the remaining decade numbers 30, 40, 50, and so on up to 90. And again, there's this complete lack of any sort of regular or useful pattern. Actually, the situation is even worse. Consider how we're going to eventually write our numbers. When we write the number 16, the 6 is actually the second digit that we write. But when we write 60, the 6 is actually the first digit that we write. So this pattern that we thought we saw with the teen numbers and with the decade numbers is actually a misleading pattern. It gets even worse. When we name the numbers in between the decades, for example, when we name a number like 67, well, this naturally lends itself to being written as something like this, 607, where I write 60 followed by a 7. And this type of mistake is sometimes called a concatenation error. Now, there's at least a little bit of a consolation here. English is, for once, not the most irregular of languages when it comes to naming numbers. But we could do much better. So what can we do? Well, we could teach kids to count in Chinese. That's probably not a very practical solution. Instead, what we could do is we can count in the Chinese fashion, but this time we'll use our standard English words for the numbers 1 through 10. And this leads to what's sometimes called the saying 10 or keeping 10 method of counting. And so how does that work? Well, so the way we would count is we'd count 1 through 10 using our standard number words 1, 2, 3, and so on. And once we get to 10, the teen numbers, we're going to start by naming them 10, 1. Now, this is a somewhat peculiar construction in English because you want to say 10 and 1. That makes a lot more sense. However, the use of the word and in constructing a number word is deemed grammatically incorrect. So if we want to be grammatically correct, even though we might think 10 and 1, we should actually say 10, 1 as the next number. And so our numbers following 10, 1 are going to be naturally 10, 2, 10, 3, 10, 4, and we're going to count this way all the way up until we get to 10, 9. Now, here's where the non-grammatical construction may be a little bit helpful. After 10, 9, we get to something that we can consider to be 10 and 10, but we'll call that 2 tens. And again, here our non-grammatical construction is a little bit more helpful in thinking about what this is, because if we say 10, 10, that sounds a little bit different, and we'll get to that later on. But after that, our next few numbers are going to be 2 tens, 1. Again, we can think about this as 2 tens and 1, 2 tens, 2, and continue on this way up to 3 tens. And then at that point, we can get our additional next decade numbers, 4 tens, 5 tens, and so on all the way up to 9 tens. And after this point, 9 tens, our next few numbers are going to be 9, 10, 1, 9, 10, 2, and so on up until we get to 9, 10, 9, at which point we do have to introduce a new number word. But we'll save that for next time.